I suggest perhaps we start with the whole area of artificial intelligence, machine learning, will the computers take over? And perhaps, Terry, you would tell us the story of what happened when the chess computer was better than human beings in playing chess.
So this takes us back to the 90s. And IBM had developed a computer hardware, actually, which called Big Blue. And this was a brute force project. That is to say, when you're playing chess, it's a deterministic game, and you have to, in your mind, look forward. If I move my knight to this location, how can my opponent counter that? And the further you can go into the future, the more accurate you could be in terms of picking the best move. And so they created a computer that simply could outpace the human in terms of how many plies you can look into the future. Now, that isn't the way humans work. Humans play chess with pattern recognition. That is to say, a human will look at the board. This is an expert chess player, and he will know immediately which 2 or 3 possible moves are the most likely to be the best. And that's because he's played thousands and thousands of chess games and seen similar board positions. And he'll maybe 1 or 2 he'll take to 10 ply, but that's as far as a human will go, whereas the machine could take it to 20 ply. Now it had an interesting impact. A lot of people thought that, if Kasparov, the world's best chess player, can't beat the machine, then humans, it's all over for humans. Basically, the chess machine is going to play each other, and humans are going to watch. And that's not how it played out. It was very interesting. What happened was that because these chess programs became generally available and personal computers became as powerful as the special purpose Big Blue, everybody had available on his laptop a chess program that could play at a grandmaster level. And that means that it could help improve your game in the same way that if you want to learn how to play tennis, you're better off playing somebody better than you because that will elevate your game. And now it's reached the point where you really, the level of human play has improved over the last couple of decades. Interestingly, it's also democratized chess because it used to be the case that if you wanted to be a world-class chess player, you had to live in a big city that had a world-class chess club, and that would allow you to play world-class chess players. But now, if anybody can have a world-class chess player in their laptop, it means it doesn't matter where you come from. And in fact, Magnus Carlsen, who's now chess champion, grew up in a small Norwegian village, and he's reached the highest levels. So one of the lessons from this is that we shouldn't think of AI as replacing humans, but rather enhancing our abilities. And they're really more right now, I would call them appliances, cognitive appliances. In the same way that we have airplanes and we have things that can help improve our ability to store information, and this is just a more cognitive version of that, helping us improve our brain.
What John Holland called flight simulators for the mind.
That's a very good way of putting it. It's very poetic.
Yeah, may I raise a question though?
Okay.
I fully agree with you that this is what we should use artificial intelligence for. Not to replace, but to augment human intelligence and thinking and these kinds of things. But I think it looks to me that although that's an eminent goal, nevertheless there will be an increasing number of approaches, dimensions where this replacement will nevertheless happen. And that raises a few very important questions. So imagine, I know it's a caricaturistic example, but imagine that they put the Encyclopedia Britannica into your head on a chip. Okay, that's, of course, I know blunt, but you know what I'm getting at. Now, since then, people will ask, okay, so why should I learn? What should I learn anything at all that used to be put into wet memory before? And then if we are using these prosthetics, so to speak, more and more, then of course there might be a decline in the biological power of the people, because there will be more and more reliance on this kind of extra add-ons, right? Like if you are, if you take vitamins from fruits all the time, then you can afford losing the genes for the synthesis of vitamins. Now, you might say that this is not necessarily a disaster, because there will be a more and more integrated type of life between, let us say, humans and these artificial intelligent gadgets. That's fine until we reach a point of a disaster, when people are not going to be worried about manufacturing these gadgets that they can put into your head, because they will be worried about their water and, next would, as Einstein said, the Third World War might be fought with knives and fists. And I think that's a very important reminder that this kind of development, artificial intelligence, although it might be very welcome, it might lead to an increased dependence on these devices on a societal scale, which under circumstances might end up in an absolute disaster.
Well, it's already happened. So for all practical purposes, the internet has made me omniscient, because I can look up, I can ask any question, and within a few seconds, query Wikipedia, which isn't quite Encyclopedia Britannica, but all the vast knowledge that's on the internet. Now, it's true. It becomes a symbiosis. In other words, it does become something that I rely on. In fact, sometimes I'm driving along and I try to Google something in my head, and it doesn't come back. But here's what I think is it's not going to be the case that it's not like a chip that replaces it. It's just that you have access to, and what the learning now is not learning the fact, but learning how to access the fact. In other words, in order to use the Google or the internet properly, you have to understand the protocols. Which keyword should you use, how to do things literally. In other words, that in itself becomes an expert talent or a skill that you can acquire. But it's symbiotic in a sense that the internet is always changing, and so does your brain as you both sort of interact with each other. But you're absolutely right about children are no longer taught by rote in the same way that we were. At least I was. You read, you memorize your multiplication tables. When I went to college, my computer was 2 sticks of wood. Mm-hmm. It was called a slide rule. Mm-hmm. And one of the virtues of the slide rule is that you get an answer pretty quickly to 2.5 significant figures, but you had to figure out the exponent yourself, mm-hmm. which means that you just got used to thinking about magnitude of numbers. Now, I teach and I get exams back where the student's off by 10 orders of magnitude. They don't have any sense because they put it into their calculator and the calculator gave them some number, and they don't have any sense for what is that even reasonable number. So it's already beginning to happen. The calculator is an early example of that. But I think that on the whole, it's as we go forward, it's going to enhance. In fact, there's a group that claims that AI really should be called augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. And that's what I would propose as being a better route for the future.
But computers are still far behind humans in other respects, aren't they? I mean, I don't know how well they can play tennis, for instance. That sort of thing may be harder to simulate.
Well, so robotics in general has proven to be extraordinarily difficult for a couple of different reasons. First of all, I think the early pioneers of AI back in the 50s and 60s underestimated the complexity of things we take for granted, like picking something up or just looking in the world and seeing things and recognizing objects. These have turned out to be the most difficult computational problems. And these are the ones that nature solved over hundreds of millions of years and embedded the algorithms to the point where we're not even aware of how those algorithms work. It's just automatic. And things that we think are the highest levels of human achievement, like playing chess or music, turn out to be is just newcomers, and is almost a byproduct or unintended consequence of the fact that we have such an enormous knowledge store and ability to be able to manipulate symbols in language, for example. But we're very far from general intelligence, and that's the point you're trying to make, which is that it's true that we can deep learning can recognize this object, and it can even come up with a description of the scene in terms of a string of English words in a sentence. However, that program doesn't understand what an object is, or doesn't understand the meaning of the sentence it just produced. It's kind of an idiot savant.
Mm-hmm.
And to go beyond that for general intelligence, to be able to understand at the very highest conceptual level, is something that's going to require a higher level of integration of all these different parts. In a sense, what we've done is we've replicated the function of a very tiny little piece of the brain, a little chunk of cortex, and a little bit of the basal ganglia. But there's a lot of real estate that we still need to be able to incorporate into our programs before they become truly intelligent.
If you look at this from the point of view of Minsky or John McCarthy or others in the 1950s, 60s who started all this and coined the term artificial intelligence, it's been incredibly slow. It's taken decades to get up to a decent AI program that will play very good chess. From another point of view, though, from a longer point of view of how long human beings have been around, this is staggeringly fast. This has happened in the last 50 years. If you were looking back in 2,000 years, you'd be saying, well, between 1950 and 2020, 2030, some amazing things happened. I'm interested in something that's called AI complete problems. It's a whole set of problems where it's been very roughly held that if you could solve one of these problems, you could solve any of them. So, such as this is traditional. If you look Google AI complete, you'll see problems like recognizing objects, the ability to recognize faces or animals, the ability to pick out something in a scene, the ability to translate languages and make reasonable semantic sense, not just the words, the ability to read something and not just recognize the characters, but get a sense really of what's going on. There are maybe half a dozen of these major problems. And I don't think they've been solved by any means, but in the last 5 years or so, we've gone up quite another step. And that's, of course, due to deep learning that you were talking about yesterday. This is quite incredible. I read a book written by somebody I think who's very knowledgeable, written in 2010, said, well, fine, someday we might get driverless cars, but no time soon. This is a book about algorithms and artificial intelligence, 2010. As for driverless trucks, forget that. This might happen, but not in my lifetime. Well, they're here. And the reason they're here is that they can recognize what's going on in general. They can look at a scene, as you were telling us yesterday, and make out there's the road. Oh, that's a poster of a small child. But that one really is a small child, and I'd better slow down and watch for that. Turns out that the limitations to driverless trucks, driverless transport, are largely legal at the moment and having to do with insurance and liability. So you could say that the limitations are largely institutional. So we're suddenly entering a different era. And I live and work in Silicon Valley, The talk is there. You must be following a lot of this yourself, but the talk there is not so much can we get there, it's oh my God, something just happened. And interestingly, what's happened isn't an awful lot of logic that's happened. It's these AI programs where I could walk through London airport and recognizes my face, is that computers are learning to make associations. They see a set of pixels, they can associate that with me and my passport. I walk down to the departure gate, there's another station you have to stop at, get photographed again. Well, they say, oh, that's him. He's moved now another 200 yards. So computers are starting, in a sense, to think like humans, in a way that they didn't do it before. So I think that something deep has happened. In the 1960s or 70s, we would have said computers are going to do massive calculations. They're electronic brains, they're almost infinitely smart at doing arithmetic. But now, what has happened is that they're kludgy, but starting to be able to think a little bit like humans. Those pixels over there, oh, that's a cat. Oh, the cat is moving. Oh, there's a tail on the cat, etc. And I find this, like most people in Silicon Valley, I find this both stimulating and fascinating and creepy all at once. I'll finish here, but I think that there is a problem that we should at least address in this group, and that is what's the future for all of this? Where is it taking us ethically and as human beings? We touched on that a little earlier.
Of course, although they're not doing actual calculations of mathematics, the progress is largely due to the greater speed and power of computers that comes from Moore's law. So they're doing calculations at a huge rate. And this is going to continue, we expect, as regards the way in which they replace human drivers and things like that. That's going to happen. But I think there's going to be a downside, even in the short term, because it may lead to a sort of de-skilling of the drivers. I know airline pilots who really worry about this in the sense that most of the flying is automated now. But if something goes wrong, then the real pilot has to take over, and they may not take over so well. I mean, it's thought that the occasion when a French airliner crashed in the South Atlantic was perhaps due to the fact that there was an emergency and the pilots had been sort of off duty, and they came to realise something serious had happened, and they didn't take the right actions because they weren't quite up to speed, as it were, on what was happening. And so there is a downside in this transitional period when the computers can't do everything. And of course, we have to worry about breakdowns, cyber flaws of various kinds. But I think one thing which is clearly going to happen is that the ability of computers to process huge amounts of data and seek small correlations just above the noise is going to increase. And this, I guess, is what the quant hedge funds are doing already with their computers. I mean, that's how they, in effect, steal money from the rest of us by having this advantage. And that advantage is probably going to grow if, in fact, they have control over...
They're helping to make a market so that, these high-speed traders think that they're greasing the wheels. Of course, they are pocketing the money.
Well, but that's nonsense, isn't it, really? Because it doesn't benefit us, it only benefits them.
That's true. Okay.
And there's a misdirection of talent.
Well, it's like a virus.
I have a few remarks and probably questions. One remark is that the reason why we are so good at general intelligence is very biological. We have to complete a life cycle, right? So that means that we have to find our way around in society. We have to get our food, we have to educate our children, and that is what I mean, the completion of the life cycle. So I predict that it might actually be very worthwhile for the artificial intelligence development to actually try to simulate that, right? To raise robots rather than design them, if you see what I mean. to put it in a very simplistic manner. That's point one. Point two, I have to say that in a sense, regarding the yield, so to speak, we are still much, much smarter than any of the achievements that you can have in artificial intelligence, because as you said in your talk, we have our biological limitations, and it's amazing that despite these biological limitations, what we have achieved. So relative to what we have, so there must be something still, some very, very clever things in our brains that we don't understand yet, so that we so limited means we can achieve so much. So I guess that there will be a fruitful interplay between neuroscience and artificial intelligence, and there will be still very surprising things to come. That's my expectation and prediction.
I completely agree, and I think that we've reverse engineered maybe 2 algorithms from the brain.
Thank you.
You know, dozens and dozens.
Thank you.
And but already we see the power of being able to do that. What I think you're referring to, though, is having something to do with global integration. So right now, for example, we have the equivalent of a visual system, right, to recognize objects, and then we have the equivalent of a recurrent network that does sequences, you know, like sequences of words. But what we don't have is a way to produce an integrated sort of global percept. So when I'm looking at the world, sensory information is coming in through my eyes and my ears and my body, and it's all integrated into a central kind of single sense of being present, of interacting. And that's a mystery, and some people call it consciousness, conscious awareness. Francis Crick was going after the visual side of it. Some people want to go after the social aspects, the fact that I'm aware of you as an autonomous agent, and that is called the theory of mind in psychology. Now, you mentioned big data. So big data is king right now in Silicon Valley. It's very valuable, and from it you can extract profits. Profits from advertising, profits from being able to make predictions for what people are likely to do in terms of voting. And I was at a meeting a few years ago. It was a Neural Information Processing Systems, NIPS meeting, where deep learning arose from that community. And Mark Zuckerberg showed up at one of our workshops.
The Facebook guy.
Yeah, Facebook, the guy who founded Facebook. Now, what is he doing there? Well, he was there to announce that they had just started a new AI lab. And Jan LeCun, who's a good friend of mine, was going to be the director. And I was introduced to him, and we had this discussion about neuroscience. It turned out that he had been looking into the brain and had asked me all these very intelligent questions, and was particularly interested in the theory of mind. And he said, could you send me some references? Which I did. Surprised that he would be interested in references and that he actually acknowledged, So I was talking to Jan afterwards, and I said, this is really quite remarkable that someone who's captain of industry, who's worth many billions of dollars, would be interested in the brain. He said, well, Terry, just think about it. Facebook has more data on more people in the world having to do with what they like, who they know, how they interact with each other, and Facebook is going to create a theory of every person's mind on the planet so that they could know you better than you know yourself or your spouse knows you. And this is both fascinating and creepy.
Creepy
is the word.
Creepy.
Mm-hmm. And it really is reaching a point where, at least in some limited domains, this is going to vastly overtake the scale of which I might interact with a few hundred people well enough to sort of predict what you're going to say or how someone is going to vote or whatever. But if you could do that for billions of people, just think of the power you have.
I guess in a sense, you were saying that we integrate information about this room by all channels. but in the case of the supercomputer, it can do the same integration
Yes.
over the whole world, in a sense.
Exactly.
So it can be, insofar as it's aware, it will be aware not just of any local region, but aware of everything at the same time.
Let me give you an example. This is interesting. You brought up the driverless car.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine this scenario. So, there's basically you're learning through experience. So it really means that you need, as you get new experiences, you can integrate that into your decisions, right? So imagine that somewhere in Australia, they introduce driverless cars, and the program comes across an object that hops across the road. It's never seen anything like that before, right? And it treats it like a dog, and it manages to avoid it. But what it does is, now, because it's a new experience, it integrates it into its learning process. And not only that, but it spreads it to all other cars in the world.
Yeah.
So that something that happens locally can then be broadcast and become part of the whole global knowledge network in all cars. So that's, I think, really part of what's going to happen is that it's going to be a much more globally integrated network of interactions between many different cultures, societies, conditions.
Yes. I mean, it's clear what the direction of travel is. I guess the speed of travel is something which there's a lot of debate about, isn't there? But also, some people worry that if this entity gets a mind of its own, as it were, we need to be rather scared, because obviously nothing matches the complexity of the human brain, but eventually it will, and there must be some advantage in the interconnection to the speed of light and the fact that signals go, I guess, about 1 million times faster than they go in our heads. And so in the long run, one can imagine that the takeover by machines will be pretty complete. And the question is how we're going to cope with that.
Well, I'm kind of looking forward to it. In the following sense, I think they'll do a better job than we have in terms of integrating the world. I really, actually, if all the things on the board, war is the part that scares me the most. AI is a distant, third or fourth.
Wow, AI really concerns me, and especially what you've just said. At what stage will AI take over from human beings? I've thoughts about that, and it goes back to what Eörs just said. So imagine that there's new entities being created that are very computational, being created all the time, and those are called human babies. They come into the world, and they need to come up to speed cognitively. So lately, meaning the last few hundred years, we've been putting them in school. And we've been educating them. This is fairly new, the human race. We've been educating them, giving them facts, teaching them how to reason, teaching them bits of logic. In kindergarten, teaching them to share toys and behave and all this sort of thing. And this goes on for quite a few years, and modern cultures could go on for 10, 15, 20 years, or more for some of us, no doubt. I like this idea that we should not just program computers, we should bring them up, we should educate them. What was your word for that?
To raise them.
We should raise them. And this has an ethical overtone, and this comes to your question. When we're bringing up human beings, the major part of education, at least for the first few years, is to teach children ethics. You're going to grow up. We want to make sure you can deal with other human beings. We want you to have some social or emotional intelligence. No, don't do that. Don't pee on the floor, please. Don't do such and such. Don't go out and bully people. It's not perfect. But I believe that if we're worried about computers or AI taking over the world, we're going to have to do something similar with AI machines. As we're raising these machines and teaching them how to deal with other machines or teaching them how to deal with human beings, we need to inculcate ethics. This is okay, that's not okay. There will probably be pirates or outliers or outlaws who will circumvent all that. But then We will, what was your word?
Lawyers.
Lawyers, yeah. We'll have to go after those. So I would assume that there'd be a class of fairly well-behaved machines, and then every so often we have to go out and say, okay, this has got out of control here, that's got out of control. I think that's what we're facing over the next 100 years or so. Ethics are going to have to be built in.
Yes. Perhaps we could ask what happened in biological evolution, because the mammals, in a sense, had the same problem, that they developed this enormous device, the cortex, with enormous power, and their invention then was love, and later on kindergartens, to deal with this processing power.
I think that one has to appreciate that there are at least two very outstanding human faculties relative to the rest of the animal world. There are a few others that are a little bit deeper, but the two really outstanding that it's difficult to argue about. One is cooperation, the other one is language. Now, the first one is remarkable because in biology, cooperation has, as an explanation, there are certain evolutionary mechanisms. Kin selection is one, which means that you help your neighbors, and then the gene that causes you to do that will spread in the population. But there you have to interact with your neighbor, with your kin. And the other thing is group selection, which has stringent criteria. That means that you are sitting in the same boat, and if you are sitting in the same boat and you cannot jump to another boat, which means that there is limited migration, then of course you will realize that it's not a good idea to row the boat because you will sink together with the others. Now that needs little migration and relatively small populations, because otherwise the cheaters will, dilute out the cooperators if the population is beyond a certain size. Now, humans are remarkable because they can cooperate in large groups, even if they are not kin. That's unprecedented in the animal world. So there is something in our inherited package which renders us to be what some people call super cooperators. So that's a big lesson. When you are designing and educating robots, I think it will be very important to keep an eye on this cooperational stance, that it must be somehow rather deeply entrenched, because otherwise there's a problem. Let me give you a very simplistic example. Take a group of unrelated chimpanzees and put them on an empty bus, right? And they should go one stop. It could be an automatic bus, right? Google bus, right? And look how many survivors you will see after a ride for one stop. Not many. Right? It's markedly different for humans. And most of the time, most people will come out alive. Now, so that shows you that there is something very different from us and between us and the rest of the primates. The second thing is language. Now, language has got a number of very important capacities. It is, of course, used for efficient communication, but also it is used for representation. By this I mean that language is also a machinery to generate concepts that they don't have an outside correspondent, right? I mean, you can define by language very easy the concept of a unicorn, and then the unicorn can go into discussion and it can go to poems and so on. Okay, it's an automated machinery to generate new concepts. So it's a roundabout loop, but it's very efficient. And the third one, that is a novel inheritance system. It's a novel inheritance system because you can pass on the information from generation to generation, and it can be cumulative. So Richard Dawkins was right when he said that this kind of machinery is really an eminent rival to the whole genetic machinery because of this cumulative nature.
Here's a footnote to what you just said. I completely agree with it. But the real breakthrough, I think, in humanity wasn't talking, because of the fact that we have a limited capacity in terms of what a single person can learn and pass on. But the breakthrough was when we invented writing. The ability to take our language and put it into a more permanent form, and now that could expand. So that what you could pass on to the next generation wasn't just what you could tell them and they can remember, but something that was more permanent. And that was really what set things off in terms of where we are today. And that's only like 10,000 years.
Yeah, I agree, but from the biological point of view, there was this innovation that allowed us to develop, communicate in linguistic terms, and we did have an inheritance. If you think about it, one person can actually store a lot of information and pass it on. I agree, writing was a very important cultural invention. This is, by the way, why in some of these societies without writing, old people are especially taken care of, because those are the living memories. That might be the only person who remembered what the tribe did 50 years ago when the flood came or whatever. So it was absolutely important to have this documented information. With writing, I agree, that's a different game. Now, what I want to say is that if you think about our biological endowment, what will be very important for the robots and or the artificial intelligence, and it goes back exactly to what you say, is education point. But the important thing is that and I think we are quite unique, not completely, but quite unique in that sense as well. We can actually learn value functions, right? So it's not only the genetic value, you have to have sex, and if you have sex, fine, you have, the release of the nice things in the brain, and then, that's the reward system. Similar for eating. But you can get a reward by yourself, from yourself, when you have derived a new equation, right? You say, oh my God, and you must know the feeling, it's incomparable to anything else. I think this is very important. That the learning of value functions, that should be something important for artificial intelligence.
So maybe the question is not artificial intelligence, but artificial will or artificial intention.
Mm-hmm.
Is that possible?
And also, the extent to which it's an analogue with a society, because I'm slightly worried that even if they're humans, the ethical code that people would get depends on where they're brought up. And you can imagine that robots get very different ethical stances depending on where they come. But the other thing is that we humans are constrained in our bodies, we're individuals. And as computers develop, then it's not at all clear to me that they will behave as individuals. They will be networked, and so that they will be more like a single mind than like a society of individuals. And to think of a civilization of robots may be inappropriate. One should think of a sort of collective mind. I mean, maybe a bit more like a beehive or something like that, but not of individuals. And so it'll be something where just all decisions are made collectively, rather than in human society where there may be correlated actions, but they're all made by individuals.
But would that mean that the cooperation would be built in from the start?
Well, I think it would emerge, but if it doesn't happen that way, then I would be pessimistic, because different groups may, just like different human groups, have antagonistic views. And also we've got to bear in mind that at the earliest stage we have to make sure we build in basic ethics and common sense. I mean, the classic example that's given is if you have your internet of things in your home, and it's supposed to keep your fridge full, and if there's no meat there, it may put the cat in the oven, because that's the only way to get meat, and not realise that that's not the right thing to do, because no one bothered to program that constraint, because they forgot that it's something that we all learned is inappropriate, but which a machine obviously would not learn unless it's told. So that sort of problem will happen quite soon, I think, with computers. Yes. But in the long run, I think the key question is to the extent to which they will be individual or single mind, and to jump ahead to what we may discuss later, if we think of intelligent life in space, anything we detect a signal from is far more likely to be one single mind than anything that we would call a civilization.
So it wouldn't be small green men.
No.
It would be one.
So-
entity.
Yes, because that may happen in the long run if the machines do hugely surpass human intelligence.
So I think that we have to be a little careful because I think humans suffer from being very self-centered. That is to say, when we talk about intelligence, it's basically our intelligence.
Yes.
And we know that there are other species on this earth that are probably intelligent in their own way, different intelligences. And what I don't, I don't know what will emerge, but it could well be a different kind of intelligence, right? That will be global and have all these properties, and it's just hard to predict. We don't know how that will emerge or what what the ethics of that type of intelligence will.
But isn't that scary? Because it
could
be entirely orthogonal to all human races.
It might be.
Yes.
It might be. And it's an experiment.
That suggests a line of research I'd love to see more of. There was a classic paper written, trying to think of the multiple authors, how a bat thinks.
Yes, that's Nagel.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is it like to be a bat?
What is it like to be a bat?
Okay.
58 or 59?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, really classic stuff, and I would love to see serious research into that. We tend, as you were just saying, we tend to think we're the only ones who think properly, and if cats had the level of intelligence we have, they might look down on us and say, look, those guys don't know how to stretch properly, they can't catch rats worth beans, and so I do think that this would be a good counter to the arrogance of human beings if we just widen to see that there are other intelligences.
Something is happening which may change things for humans, which is virtual reality.
Yeah.
And it's reached the point, and it actually is relevant to the point made earlier, which is you need a minimum level of computation to get off the ground.
Yeah.
And I actually did this calculation back when I was a graduate student, when computers were, the VAX 780 was the standard candle, which was like a megahertz. And I figured that the minimum computation you needed for the human brain was on the order of now a petaflop.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. We've reached the petaflop. So we've kind of broken that threshold. And I think there's going to be similar thresholds that we're going to be passing as we continue to, as computers continue to increase their strength.
There is one thing that I want to remark here, and that is that teaching is also extremely rare in the animal world. Teaching is different from learning, right?
Absolutely.
So, for example, in chimps, there is only one well-documented type of teaching when the mother teaches the kid how to crack a nut with two stones. One is used as an anvil, the other is used as a hammer, and that takes about 2 years, to accomplish the teaching process, right? One case, 2 years. Now compare this to our docility that we have. Okay, that's a crucial difference, and it's part of our basis of society.
Right, so something interesting about that observation is that I've seen films of that process, and here's what you see. You see the mother chimp with this anvil and doing this, and the little baby chimp is really interested and is focused. But never does the mother chimp take the hand of the baby chimp and show the baby chimp how to hit the nut. And this is because they don't have something we have, which is shared attention. Mm-hmm. And shared attention is when the mother and the child both focus on the same object at the same time. And that's a very important critical step to being able to educate, is that process.
That's also, but what goes beyond that for us, and that leads to the problem of cooperative action, we have also shared intentionality.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That I have an idea that you are going to do together with me something in order to, right? That's a very, Tomasello has the
that's a higher order conceptual equivalent.
So this pointing phenomena, where a human can point,
Yes.
and the other human will follow
Or gaze following, yes.
The gaze, while the monkey will see the finger and look at it. Can we teach artificial intelligence systems to point, of course, in a very direct sense we can, but to share our attention, understand that we are interested in this because of that? Can we teach them our value systems, or will they develop their own value systems?
There is a natural system. Dogs. Dogs can follow gaze, and the shepherd dogs can actually be instructed by gaze alone. It's very well documented, but that's because of intense artificial selection. Right. You know, dogs, as they say, many people say, oh, this dog is almost human. Looks like, yeah, that is exactly because that was the basis of selection on which dogs were bred. So it's possible to achieve this even in vet systems.
So something interesting has happened, again, just within the last 5 years, which is that traditional optimal control theory produces, robots can now reach, but what's very, very difficult to do is this. In other words, to be able to handle
like a human.
Uncertainty and perturbations and so forth. They like things to be fixed, and these are the robots on the assembly lines. But within the last few years, it's now possible to use deep learning to be able to do this. And so, I've seen simulations, and now there are real robots that they're building that can do this. So I don't see any limitation. I don't see why it might evolve a little more slowly, because it's a materials problem as much as it is a control problem to create something that is has the degrees of freedom and the flexibility that our fingers have, for example. But it's I don't think there's any fundamental limit.
There is something where I think the rather dramatic development is inevitable. And that's the case when you have to use artificial intelligence and robots in settings where they have to decide autonomously for a long time. And that can include, of course, very dangerous rescue operations, working in extreme environments, and of course, the most exciting extreme environment is planetary exploration. You can imagine many situations on Mars, later on Europa, where these robots cannot rely, on remote control that takes, I don't know, 2 hours or how many hours, it's absolutely impossible. Right. They have to be able to make their decisions. Preferably they should be able to repair themselves possible. In the long run, they have to produce themselves because there will be death. So it's inevitable that there will be this reproduction element. And as an evolutionary biologist, I would say that's the dangerous bit. Because immediately there is the possibility of acting on your own behalf, right? So depending how the genetics works. So there is a problem where I would be afraid.
I don't think this is in the future. A lot of this is here already. A very large part of the economy is autonomous. A lot of the financial part of the economy has humans doing some judgments, but the trades are executed autonomously. We don't see them happening. They're executed by algorithms. So my metaphor for this, I got fascinated a few years ago when I learned that aspen trees are a single organism. So you can have an aspen forest. The trees are sticking up above the ground. The roots are all interconnected. You can correct me here if I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right about that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So my metaphor is that what's sticking above the ground in the economy is the parts that we humans see, the parts that the screen in front of the traders, and then some trade is made, something happens. In fact, what triggered this idea in my mind was that I remember going into San Jose airport, and just the boarding process, I put my card, my frequent flyer card, into a little kiosk. And I noticed there was a 3 or 4 second delay before I got my boarding pass. And I thought, why? So I put my boarding pass in. That's the tree above the ground. But then I reckoned below the ground, a lot was happening. Somehow my name was recognized. The industrial word is it's captured. My data was then captured. That goes to a central computer. It goes to the TSA, the security people. I was going to London, so doubtless it goes to the UK. Oh, the guy's from Northern Ireland. Hang on a moment. All of this is, and he's trained in engineering. He was in Berkeley in the bad old days. His career took him a lot to the Soviet Union. Maybe for you it would have been 2 second delay, but for me it was 5 seconds. But there's all of these servers talking to servers, comparing, gathering data. That's already the way the economy works. And so there's a second layer, or an underground layer of the economy. I call that the autonomous economy. This is already there. It's growing. I made some back-of-the-envelope calculations. Hard to say, but I reckon by about the year 2030, it would be similar in size, dollar terms, to what I call the physical economy above the ground. This is already there, and it has autonomous intelligence. If you define intelligence not as being like humans, but just simply the ability to take in some situation and react appropriately, that's my base definition of intelligence, then there's autonomous intelligence already.
Yeah. But I mean, it could decide in a particular city it needs some apartment blocks. But that's something it does in the sort of virtual world of ideas.
Right.
Which is a big gap from that to actually putting one brick on top of another and having a...
Well, it could issue orders. It could issue orders.
But
it could put in,
yes.
the cement truck should come on this day, and here's the
No,
plan.
it could do that, but what I'm saying is that will it ever get to the stage without a human being involved?
Why not?
It can actually...
Why not? In other words, we would still be responsible for the goals. We specify what the cost function is. By the way, this is something which is central to AI right now, is that you have to have some cost function that tells you if you're doing better or not. Otherwise, how do you know if you're learning something that's going to help you in the future? And that raises a bunch of interesting questions. I mean, who determines what the cost function is? And this came up at a recent meeting when someone was saying there's going to be social injustice because, right now we have rules about, not being biased against certain racial groups and certain things, when we make decisions for loans and for scholarships and so forth. And if you're going to be creating an artificial intelligence that's going to optimize, some goal, like, we want the population to do better, it's not going to incorporate these societal ethical concerns. And so how do you put that into the cost function? And, how do you design it so that it's doing ultimately, even though you don't know what the consequence is, unintended consequences, you have to specify it.
Can I ask, in terms of cost function, this autonomous economy, would that mean that it's really an autonomous system of computers and stuff that will determine the cost of building the apartment block that Martin is talking about?
Well, yeah, there's a huge amount of... I have a general rule in AI. If you can imagine it, and it's here already. Let me give you an example. An awful lot of architecture at the highest level is done in the United States, say in a small elite architecture firm in Seattle. And quite recently, and these are real examples, with CAD, computer-aided design, or whatever you want to call it, a lot of the detailing and the actual lower level work, the brick-by-brick work, that's done computationally, and a lot of that's done in places like Hungary and Eastern Europe, because they're technically advanced, and they have people who know how to do this software. So I can say, oh, hang on, this building's fine, but somebody just told me we need to stretch it by 25 meters. Now, human architects can do all that, but tell you, come back in 3 days, I'll have new drawings for you, new costings. We'll have to check also with building regulations. Where I live, you have to check with the seismic regulations. Now you say, okay, I want 25 more feet. No, it goes off to the software in Hungary and to the nerdy guys who are there. And it comes back, the techies, let's call them techies. It comes back to Seattle probably within 3-4 seconds. And the whole thing is costed. There might be some implication that you're maybe traversing some pipelines or gas lines that were in there already. So just come back to Seattle. This is the way aircraft are already designed, both in Boeing and in Airbus. Very, very little. It used to be human engineers. I do the avionics, the electronics, and then I pass that to somebody else who says, well, hang on, you've encroached in my space here. This in 3 dimensions is already happening. And then those instructions are passed pretty much it used to be that the design people had to talk to the construction people, and they were sort of tossing the designs over the wall, the construction people saying, are you kidding, how do we ever make this? All of that has been automated. So putting the bricks in place is also being automated. This is already happening.
There's a beautiful example of that occurred back in the 60s and 70s, and this was early days of integrated circuits. And so it used to be an art form in the sense that engineers were trained to be able to generate memory cells and logical circuits. And the idea was to pack as many as you could onto the real estate that you had. And back then, you could maybe do 1,000 circuits or something, 1,000 gates. And as they were getting bigger and bigger, it was taking longer and longer. So Carver Mead had this brilliant idea. Let's write a computer program that can design the chip, right? The chip is the computer, and the computer is now designing itself. And the trade-off was it wasn't as efficient as the human. The human could really, figure out the special purpose ways of jiggering them in, whereas the computer would just put them in blocks and sort of, But in the end, it was you save so much human labor that it was by far the most efficient way, and it took over. And all of VLSI design now is done automatically in the computer in exactly the same way you describe buildings being designed.
And the construction too.
Yeah, but this is a general principle, which is that once you have this cycle where the computer can take over designing one level, you can then have a hierarchy where now at a higher level, you have somebody making decisions up here. Right now, maybe a human. I wanted 25 more feet or whatever. Well, that why stop there? Let's have that be taken over by another program, which would be a higher conceptual level. What you end up with is a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it's exactly how our brain was evolved. It was a whole hierarchical set of control systems.
So there's a speculation in Silicon Valley. When are we going to get a 3D printer that can print a 3D printer? And I don't think that's far away. The print head's the hard bit.
So manufacture will be distributed.
You get a von Neumann
self-replicating
automaton.
Yeah, but okay, that's a very interesting question because it also has to be evolvable, right? That's not a trivial issue, right? I mean, we can expand later a little bit on it. It's not a trivial issue because it's very easy to generate detrimental mistakes, but it's much less easier to generate mistakes that can actually be hopeful in such an artificial setting. But I wanted to have an observation, and the observation is that there is another field where I think we can aid human thinking. Not only this massive artificial intelligence things like massive Bayesian machinery or deep learning, whatever. There is an intermediate, what we call in our place in Munich, cognostics, and that is to aid the human brain in how should I say, ordinary thinking process. First, imagine your example is the building. So I know that in architecture there is an incredible financial loss because people are not explicit enough what they want. Then the architect misunderstands that.
Yeah.
Then the builder, the actual constructor, partly misunderstands the architect. And then, you know, a year later, everybody looks at the monster and says, oh, well, I mean, this is not, yeah, but this is what you thought. No, not quite, but that was not explicit.
It's called the state of building in MIT.
Okay, absolutely. Now, so, for example, one of the things that you have to do in such case, you actually have to map, and there is a platform to do it, have to map what are the desires of what are the real desires of the client, right? And then, because you cannot have an expert system for everything, because hell of a development, you must need some kind of a generalized system. One of the general system is that you go through a machinery where you define an option space, right? A building has to have a location, it has to have certain dimensions, it must serve a purpose, must be in a certain region of the financial. And there are, you know, in this multi-dimensional space, there are a few options for all of them. And if you map these together in an expert group, together, it's called, you know, a collaborative session, then you map the problem. And once you have mapped the problem, then the machine can look the combinatorics on the basis of the different interactions that the experts told the computer, okay, in between these two options in two dimensions, there is a very negative correlation. And then you have a system where you have got 100,000 possible correlations and no person can do anything with it but the computer. Yeah. So there is this intermediate stage of cognostics, which I think it will be very important for boosting human thinking.
By the way, that's called constraint satisfaction, and those are incredibly difficult combinatorial problems.
Yes,
so, you know.
Yes.